So imagine trying to fight for your freedom, but society has literally built physical walls specifically to keep you trapped. Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating: how 19th century American protest authors literally weaponized the feeling of confinement. We're going to unpack how these writers took the harsh, physical realities of segregation and claustrophobia and completely flipped them, turning them into powerful literary tools for social justice. Basically, by forcing their readers to mentally experience these suffocating spaces, they completely shattered the era's grand illusions of boundless freedom.
Okay, let's kick things off with this famous Walt Whitman quote. Just listen to this. "Loosed of limits and imaginary lines." It perfectly captures the absolute soaring ideal of mid-19th century America, right? This was the golden age of manifest destiny. It was all about boundless freedom and that deeply romantic myth of the open road. The cultural messaging back then promised that movement and endless expansion were totally possible for everyone. The whole nation was pushing westward, and the overarching story they told themselves was one of infinite, absolutely unrestricted potential.
But we've got to stop and ask a pretty critical question here. In a society so utterly obsessed with universal movement, who is actually allowed on that open road? Because those grand promises of freedom, they were incredibly selective. For women, for the working class, and certainly for African Americans, both enslaved and free, the reality was not an open road at all. No way. Their actual daily lived experience was defined by stasis, by hard boundaries, and by incredibly strict physical and social confinement.
And this right here really lays bare the core hypocrisy of the era. You see, American abstract freedom was designed for this idealized, bodiless citizen. That's who gets the unrestricted expansion. But if you possessed what we call a marked body, meaning you were defined by your race, your gender, or your poverty, you were completely tied to your physical form, and because of that, you were effectively denied that abstract freedom. You were restricted, you were contained, and you were completely excluded from the actual privileges of citizenship. So this weird paradox actually birthed a pretty toxic ideology known as manifest domesticity. Basically, expanding the nation was pitched as, just growing the national family. But here's the catch. To keep that family cohesive, society felt it had to tame, conquer, and basically domesticate anything it deemed foreign or other, which, let's be real, effectively meant anyone who wasn't a white, property-owning male. It was this incredibly insidious way of maintaining strict control, all disguised as spreading civilization. Section 1. Architectures of Inequality. The Reality of Containment. Because you see, this ideological separation wasn't just floating around in speeches and essays. It was literally built into the physical spaces where people lived and worked.
Just take a look at this. This is an 1863 floor plan for a New York tenement, and the cold mathematical division of human beings here is just wild. 12 families packed onto each flat, and out of 21 bedrooms, a grand total of 6 have any provision for light or air. That's it. The rest are pitch dark, incredibly close, and completely unventilated. This architecture was actively designed to suffocate. It was built specifically to separate the rapidly growing working class and immigrant populations from everyone else, shoving them into the dark while wealthier folks quite literally enjoyed the open air.
And Jacob Ries's incredibly visceral photography forces us to just stare this entrapment right in the face. Look at these windowless rooms literally packed floor to ceiling with lodgers at 5 cents a spot, or these incredibly vulnerable kids sleeping on exterior street grates just to make it through the night. This isn't just a poverty issue, right? It's an active spatial problem. It is the absolute literal antithesis of that open road myth we talked about.
So this extreme physical separation was actually mirrored by a strict ideological containment, which was heavily policed by popular publications at the time. Whether you're looking at the working class shoved into tenements, enslaved African Americans confined to slave quarters, or women restricted entirely to the domestic home, the physical structures of society were built to segregate. They were built to control. By keeping these groups physically walled off, the dominant culture firmly cemented the gap between the privileged and the oppressed. They made absolutely sure that those marked bodies stayed exactly where society wanted them.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Literature as a Prison Break. Decoding 19th century strategies. Because right in the face of all this physical and ideological entrapment, 3 brilliant marginalized authors decided to fight back. And here they are: Harriet Wilson, Rebecca Harding Davis, and Harriet Jacobs. They published these incredible protest texts right on the very brink of the Civil War. Now, they completely understood that their privileged middle-class readers were totally disconnected from this reality of containment. So what did they do? They exposed the sheer hypocrisy of the American dream by narratively trapping those comfortable readers right inside the grim, inescapable realities of their characters.
To pull this off, these authors actually manipulated their readers' terministic screens. Now, theorist Kenneth Burke coined this term, and it basically describes how language acts as a literal lens that dictates how we perceive reality. By meticulously crafting these textual environments of severe claustrophobia, Wilson, Davis, and Jacobs effectively forced their readers to peer through a brand new terministic screen. They forced them to witness an oppressive reality that they had previously, and quite comfortably, just ignored. And they pulled off this massive perspective shift using a really brilliant three-step rhetorical strategy. It makes some pretty dense theory incredibly accessible. Step 1. Visually and narratively lock the reader in a dark, tight space. Step 2. Provide scenes of social instruction. This is where they show privileged characters inside the story, reacting with apathy or disgust, which effectively teaches the reader exactly how not to react. And finally, Step 3. Direct address. They speak straight to the reader to demand empathy and provoke actual political action in the real world. Let's look at Rebecca Harding Davis, for example. In Life in the Iron Mills, she didn't just casually invite the wealthy, comfortable readers of the Atlantic Monthly into her story. No, she literally dragged them down into the stifling, dirty, smoke-choked iron mills of Virginia and trapped them there. Then, she introduces these wealthy visitors who just look at the laborers with absolute apathy. By showing these visitors as so callous and totally disconnected, Davis is explicitly telling her readers, do not act like this. Then you have Harriet Jacobs, who took a deeply psychological approach in Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. She famously had to hide for 7 agonizing years in a tiny, pitch-black garret above her grandmother's storeroom just to escape her abusive enslaver. And here's the kicker. During the chapters detailing those 7 years, Jacobs does something radical. She completely stops speaking to the reader. She just leaves them utterly stranded in the text. By suddenly withholding that direct connection, she forces the reader to actually feel a fraction of the incredibly suffocating isolation of slavery. Meanwhile, Harriet Wilson went right after the sacred 19th century ideal of the domestic home. In her work, Arnig, she completely shatters that whole illusion of manifest domesticity. She exposes the idyllic northern middle-class home for what it really was for her protagonist, a free black woman named Frado, a site of brutal ideological control, physical abuse, and endless, grueling labor. Wilson makes it crystal clear that for marginalized bodies, the perfect American home was honestly just another prison. Which brings us to Section 3, Forging Radical Empathy, building a bridge between feeling and action. Because by forcing readers to feel this intense claustrophobia, these authors had a much bigger goal in mind. They weren't just trying to make people sad. Like author Richard Wright famously said, all literature is protest, and the sheer brilliance of Wilson, Davis, and Jacobs proves that this kind of literature is never just about looking nice on a page. By using physical confinement as a narrative weapon, they successfully built a bridge between a passing emotional reaction and a fiery conviction for real social justice. They didn't just want to tell a good story. They were trying to forge entirely new readers who would step out of the book and actively fight the physical and ideological containment happening in their own world. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this. We might not have those exact 1863 tenements today, but let's be real. Spatial containment is still very much a thing. What invisible walls, zoning lines, and ideological barriers are still boxing people in right now? And honestly, more importantly, who are the authors writing the protest literature today that will trap us, shake us awake, and finally expose those walls? Thanks so much for tuning in, and hey, keep looking really closely at the spaces around you.